of all, I'd like to thank everybody for taking an hour of your time to join us this afternoon to talk about how we can leverage SharePoint for ARRA transparency. Now, just a quick poll, I guess. Do you guys know what ARRA is? If you do know what ARRA is, just say yes. Yes, Don, the slides will be made available for you as well. So if you know what ARRA is, just say yes. If you don't know, then you don't have to say yes. All right, so we got Don. Okay. No? Okay. Good. Well, a couple of things before we get started. Thank you. A couple of people responding. Obviously, what I'd like to do in this presentation is there we go.
There we go.
Yeah, so I was flipping the wrong slide, Catherine. First of all, look at what ARRA is, and more importantly, look at how we can take advantage of a great platform like SharePoint to provide ARRA transparency. So after completing this webcast, we'll look at and understand the current requirements of ARRA transparency. I'll define what ARRA is, what these transparency requirements are, and we'll talk about some of the challenges with compliance mandates like ARRA, and know the benefits of SharePoint as a platform and why we can use third-party technologies to add further value to SharePoint. A quick background on myself. Again, as Catherine has introduced me, my name is Dux Raymond Sy. I am a project management professional. In addition, a certified SharePoint geek. My company is called Innovative E. I'm a managing partner at Innovative E, and also do contract authoring and teaching for Learning Trade International. It's a global training organization. I wrote the book SharePoint for Project Management for O'Reilly. And if you're interested, feel free to connect with me. There's my email, my LinkedIn profile, my blog, and also on Twitter. And for those familiar with Twitter, right now we can certainly carry on our dialogue while this webcast is in session in Twitter. You can use the hashtag SP4ARRA. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right at it. Before we look at how we can take advantage of SharePoint to provide ARRA transparency, what I thought we'd do is, first of all, set the level of the playing field, if you may, and define what ARRA is, and more importantly, look at some of ARRA's unique or not so unique reporting requirements, and what are some of these impact to a lot of different organizations. So ARRA stands for American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. This is more familiar to us as the federal stimulus package of the U.S. government. This was signed into law by President Obama in February 17. And pretty much a lot of us might have looked at this more in detail or might not. But pretty much what the stimulus package is about is really funding a lot of projects to stimulate the economy. And there's a lot of different areas of the economy, and we'll talk about that in a while. But essentially this whole stimulus package is to stimulate the American economy and create jobs and all that good stuff. Now, one of the key areas of ARRA is known as their reporting needs, or making sure that how these stimulus funds are being spent is transparent. So it has a section that requires transparency. There's a lot of guidelines and rules around it. However, it's still not very, very specific yet. So there are a lot of clarifications still emerging. You can find and see all the details at recovery.gov. And certainly I'll type this URL in a while towards the end of the presentation. So that's what ARRA is. And what we're focused on in this hour is to look at ARRA transparency and how we can provide that using SharePoint. So what are some of the stimulus-funded projects? There's a lot of different areas that these stimulus funds can be used, but it centers around core industries, namely construction. So you look at your road building, bridges, healthcare, education, telecommunications, and energy. So these are the core areas as to where the stimulus fund would be spent on. And the transparency requirements are not unique to ARRA. For those that are working in the government sector, anybody in the government sector with us today? Folks in the government sector? Just say yes if you're with the government sector. Okay, move on. All right, great. So Peter, great. So compliance is nothing new. And if I would give you some examples of some compliance that we kind of sort of know of in the past few years, it would be things like Sarbanes-Oxley, SOX. That all came about due to large organizations not being, I guess, transparent with their auditing and accounting practices. So the whole Sarbanes-Oxley compliance came about. Another area of compliance, for example, is in the healthcare sector. There is a compliance called HIPAA, H-I-P-A-A, that has to do with information privacy. Around the medical field as well, there's the compliance called FDA Part 11 compliance. It has to do with document management compliance for medically related information. So compliance, transparency is not new, it's not unique to ARRA. However, the reason why it's kind of sort of unique, and we're starting to hear about it, is a lot of organizations getting these funds are now then required to provide transparency. Now, moving on. So what are some of these transparency requirements, or to put it simply, what are some of these reporting requirements? So when we talk about transparency, essentially, to make it simple, it's the idea that, okay, let's say I'm an organization and I got part of this stimulus fund. Before I can start spending it or using it or invest in projects to help stimulate the economy, I have to provide a mechanism so that how I spent the money and where it's going towards is transparent. And if you're wondering, transparent to who? Well, transparent to the ones who gave me the money, the federal government, transparent to the ones who's pretty much paying for all these things, which is the taxpayer. And how do you provide these transparency? Technology plays a critical role. So what are some of the areas of transparency or detailed reporting that are required by ARRA? Here are some of the areas. Several areas of detailed reporting are required by the bill to provide transparency and accountability to the American public. First of all, for example, information collection and dissemination. When we're talking about this is, for example, a bridge is being built. And I'll show you some examples, screenshots of this in a while. A bridge is being built. As a taxpayer, in theory, let's say, like I live in Virginia, I can go to whoever's responsible for building bridges in Virginia, so let's say Department of Transportation. I can go to their website or some public-facing system and go there and look at all the bridges. So I can pick a specific bridge, especially funded by ARRA, and I can look at, okay, where are they now? In the next few weeks, what are they going to work on? How much money have they spent? And are they ahead? Are they behind? And more importantly, performance along the lines of how many jobs was created as a result of building this bridge. Now, if you think about that, sounds quite simple, Dux. Well, it's simple and it's not, because take that example like a bridge being built. Think about the different entities that would have been involved in building that bridge, and how information is passed from one to the other is critical. So, for example, the fund or the grant money came from the federal government, somehow went down, I don't know, to the Department of Transportation, and then it got doled down to Virginia DOT. So that level of transparency should be available, like how much money was given to whom, how are they spending it, etc. And then to the lowest level, where obviously these bridges are being built by private organizations like construction companies or contractors. The question again now becomes, how would they report back to the state DOT, and then the state DOT report back to the federal DOT. So all those interactions are very, very important. What else do we need to report on around ARRA? Things like how budget, I kind of talked about that, is being spent, risk management, and what are some of the actions specific to OR type. So it depends. It depends on how big of a grant you've received, or how much of the fund you've received, or how less you've received. And there are a lot of guidance out there already. However, it's not very, very detailed yet. For example, when we talk about things like jobs being created, now what do we exactly mean by that? Does that mean people who lost jobs before got their jobs back. Is that job being created, or is this like some brand new jobs that never existed before? So all those definitions are still being defined currently. Now, I kind of alluded to this, but just to give you a picture on how the reporting would work. Based on the specification and the requirement, the reporting or transparency should roll up. So for example, at a highest level, when I say federal, the federal government, you can go to, for example, recovery.gov. And from there you can drill down at the high level where, okay, and at the federal level, let's look at this agency. And then let's drill down to the state. Let's look at that state and look at all the bridges they're building. So if you can imagine that, for now, I'll show you a screenshot of this. So from the highest level, you can drill down to the lowest level, which also means at the lowest level, in this case the contractor, the people building the bridge, should be able to provide relevant data to the agencies that they're working with immediately above them. So it's very critical. Now if you're wondering, okay, so how often should these roll-ups happen? How frequent will these information be passed on from one to the other? From what I've seen and what I've read is, looks like once all this is in place, the reporting should happen weekly, which is on a regular basis. So here are just some snapshots of reporting from ARRA, from the law. It's a 400-page document, but I just want to read a couple of highlights here. It says the Recovery Act defines recipient as any entity that receives Recovery Act funds directly from the federal government. So when we talk about recipient, it could be at the lowest level, the contractor, or it could be at the state level. So again, depends on how the money is distributed and what projects are being worked on. Reporting requirements apply to the prime non-federal recipients of federal funding. What this is talking about is, well, based on the requirement, really, whoever gets the chunk of the fund, they're responsible for it. So in this case, for example, the federal gave out some funds for the state should be responsible for reporting. But then what would the state be reporting on if the state doesn't have any information from the lower levels of, or lower level entities that's actually doing the work? So in short, everybody needs to report on those critical areas in order for the state to get proper reporting information. The prime recipient is responsible for reporting on their use of funds as well as any subawards. Recipient reporting to begin 180 days after enactment. The first recipient reporting would start on October 10 or 9. So, this is a few months away, but if you think about it, that's not too far out. So right now, a lot of organizations have received these funds. And what's critical is, as they start spending these funds, or start engaging a lot of the projects that will stimulate the economy, that means the reporting mechanism, and I'm not talking about just the technology, but the process of reporting, how information would flow from lower level to higher level, all that should be in place already. How about the federal agency's responsibility? Well, OMB stands for Office of Management and Budget, publish standardized guidance on the recipient reporting. Well, the way it's defined now, the current terms and conditions leave significant discretion to federal agencies on how recipients should report the quantitative outputs and outcomes, the results from these projects and activities. So what this is saying is there are a lot of different metrics that can be looked at, but we just don't have time to go into detail here. Detailed reporting instructions will be made available on this website. And currently, if you go to the OMB's website, they have already defined, if you may, items that they're looking for. Obviously, things like budget, jobs created, what's the status of a project, what the tasks are, and all that. Those are currently available. And later, I'll talk more about the technical details as to what specific information needs to roll up from one to the other. So in a nutshell, that's what ARRA is. That's what ARRA transparency/reporting is all about. Now, what are some of the challenges? I'm sure as I was describing this, some of you might have some red flags already raised. Some of the key challenges. The current transparency guidelines are not very, very specific yet. And since ARRA is relatively new, everybody's in a hurry, it's in a rush, and how this is being defined, I mean, it's all good. Most of the guidelines are there. But again, things like what do you mean by jobs created? So those need to be ironed out further. What we're finding in, especially the work I'm doing with a lot of different of these entities or recipients, is a lot of them lack standardized processes. Now, what do I mean by this? If you look at the crux of all this transparency guidelines and reporting, it's all about project management. And unfortunately, a lot of these entities or recipients, they don't have a standardized, for example, project management process. It could be as simple as, okay, how do you report on status? What do you mean by 50% complete? What do you mean by 80% complete? Or it could be as simple as I was working with a organization and they said, Dux, we want a dashboard, you know, red, yellow, green. Red if it's late, yellow if it's almost late, green if we're on schedule. I go, okay, what do you mean by late? How late is late? And then everybody had their different ideas of what late means. One person said, well, if it's 30% behind schedule, that's late. And then the other person said, well, if it's 10 days behind, that's late. So there's no standard in place. And what a lot of organizations think right now that all they need is some kind of technological platform to provide reporting. But to me, that's the most easiest part. Technology is the easiest part. And you'll see this in SharePoint a lot. What's harder, what's important is you have to have a defined process which is repeatable, and then make the technology adapt to it in order to be successful in this. I mean, we can throw any technology you want, but if people don't agree on what you mean by late, right? So this won't work. ARRA has a lot of aggressive deadlines. So that was the first example I showed you, October 10th. There's a lot of other deadlines around different types of reporting. And then also disparate reporting platforms. What I mean by this as a challenge is, and I'm sure you will agree, organizations today have different tool sets and different platforms being used already. For example, organizations would use a specific platform for financial reporting, and they would use a specific platform for timesheet or timekeeping. So you have all these pieces in place already. Now, with this transparency requirement, the question now becomes, how do you make all this work together seamlessly, and more importantly, be able to reflect accurate information or accurate reports on how funds are being spent, number of jobs created. So there's a lot of tools in place already, but the challenge now becomes is how do you make all of them interact together and work seamlessly. Now, what I find with compliance, and again, we've seen this throughout, what history teaches us, Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, whatever, a lot of times the devil is in the details. With ARRA, we are at the early stages, and I'm sure in the next month, in the next few weeks, we start seeing this shape more in further detail. Currently, the federal government doesn't have all the finite details that we need. So much is established over time as the de facto standards emerge. So what we're talking about here is, okay, whoever, be it organization or entity, comes up with, in this case, a acceptable reporting platform or a transparency platform, that can potentially define and lock down the compliance or the guidelines itself. So the long and short of this is it's still evolving. It's still evolving. It takes time to get there. I love this slide. I got it from a colleague of mine. He has a website, Clever Workarounds. But essentially, what we're seeing here, this can be considered as what's called a wicked problem. What a wicked problem is, there's a lot of unknowns, where if you look at the left section, of, you have uncertainty, problem is on the middle, where different people have different ideas and it diverges. So the key is us as experts or facilitators, if you want to put it that way, we have to get stakeholders or key people involved and have them come to what's called the shared understanding. So that pink box there, you can call that shared understanding, and really figure out, okay, how are we going to report on jobs created? How are we going to report on budget? Have them have a shared understanding and have their understanding converge and come up with an acceptable solution. Now, so it does take time, and this kind of ties back to ARRA in general. So, with that being said, so I talked about what ARRA is, what the reporting requirements or transparency requirements are. Let's look at why SharePoint is such a great platform to provide this need of transparency for ARRA. Now, just before I start talking about SharePoint, just a quick poll here. Anybody using SharePoint? If you're using SharePoint right now, just say, yes, I'm using SharePoint. Okay? All right, great. So obviously we don't have time to go into the detail and have me define SharePoint, but I'll clearly, very good, Tyler, thank you. So, but I'll quickly give you a 50,000-foot view of what SharePoint is, and I'll explain why this is such a great choice for ARRA transparency. SharePoint is a Microsoft product, and it's essentially a platform. It started out as a platform intended for collaboration, which is great, and a lot of people are using SharePoint for that matter. But more and more organizations are seeing that SharePoint is more than a document management or collaboration tool. It is a platform. If you look at Microsoft's tool sets today, a lot of them are built around or going to be built around SharePoint. So why is it such a great choice for ARRA transparency? It's very flexible and scalable. And what I mean by flexible and scalable, unlike our traditional or stereotype of Microsoft products, it's not very inclusive. In fact, I can say SharePoint is the most open source product Microsoft has. It's flexible in the sense that it's not limited to the Microsoft environment. A core component of SharePoint is using web-based technology, so in short, anybody and everybody can take advantage of this. But scalable in the sense that a lot of the key functionalities around reporting is already there, and it's just a matter of customizing or configuring. And then another aspect of flexibility is you can take SharePoint and make it interact with existing systems out there. And again, it doesn't have to be Microsoft system or a Microsoft platform. You can take, I don't know, an Oracle database, for example, make it interact with SharePoint. And when I say interact, you can take information from Oracle, make it show up in SharePoint, and have users interact with SharePoint and populate Oracle or PeopleSoft or all these non-Microsoft products. So it's very, very flexible, and there's a lot of different ways to do this. And the key benefit of SharePoint is, since it's such a well-built platform, it saves you a lot of time from building a tool from the ground up. And like I said, a lot of these reporting capabilities is already there. It's just a matter of tweaking it. So that makes a compelling case on why this is such a great platform for ARRA with all the deadlines looming. Individual projects can have a collaborative SharePoint site, and I'll show you an example of this in a while, where you can take a bridge project, for example. Everything about that project is in the SharePoint website, from schedule to budget to approval forms. It can be in a single SharePoint website. And these SharePoint sites, you can limit access, so we can define that only folks working in that project can come in, and depending on their role, they can see certain things or they can't see certain things. Once all these artifacts are centrally stored, it means it's traceable, it means it's archivable. So if there comes a point in time that a certain project gets audited, you can easily pull it up from an archived SharePoint site. Reporting can be streamlined. We can automate that, and I'll show that to you as well. And the beauty with SharePoint is it's new, yet it's not new. It takes on a lot of the familiar concepts in Windows and Office, and just teach people some new things in SharePoint, but it's relatively straightforward to use versus learning a whole new set of system or tools. And SharePoint has a widely installed base. A lot of organizations today are Microsoft-based organizations, even the government, and almost all of them, if not all of them, would have SharePoint already in place. So it makes a great case for any organization, especially if you're a recipient, to take advantage of this platform. Now, I'm not saying this is the only platform out there. Obviously, there's a lot of different platforms that you can leverage to report error transparency. But in my experience, with all these criteria, SharePoint is such a great choice. So what's the key consideration that you have to think about if you decide you want to use SharePoint for error reporting or to provide error transparency? A couple of things. You need to determine the level of funding you get and the amount of projects you'll be working with. You have to start thinking about program and project hierarchies, for example. So let's say I'm the DOT, Virginia DOT, for example, and I'm responsible for, I don't know, 10 bridges. And so for that matter, I have to sit down and start mapping out, okay, 10 bridges, each bridge project would have its own site. Then I have to think about what are some of the things I want to measure around budget, around performance. Will I be working with a single contractor or multiple contractors? Will these information need to interact with other platforms? It could be as simple as interacting with Microsoft Project. I'll talk about that briefly. So you have to think about all these hierarchies, and most importantly, how the roll-ups will take place. So if I had 10 projects, all the budgetary information of these 10 projects that has individual project sites would go up one level for the whole bridge program, and I can slice and dice funding from there, for example. You have to determine milestones for reporting. Certainly at the highest level, for example, at the federal level, I'm sure they won't be interested in the lowest level detail that you would report on. So how would you develop your milestones? For example, it could be as simple as Phase 1 design of the bridge completed, Phase 2 design of the bridge completed, Phase 1 of the foundation building completed. So what are some of these milestones that you would want to use? And the key is you want it to be consistent. So your reporting would be consistent. So if you're building 10 bridges, what are some of the consistent milestones are you going to use around these 10 bridges? You would need the actual task that would feed into these milestones. So you need to define that. So essentially, if you're looking through this, what you're doing here is you need to define your work breakdown structure, your WBS. You need to align financial reporting with your schedule. And at the end of the day, ARRA is all about funds. So how can you align, well, a couple of things. How can you align, A, where the money came from? Because in my experience, what we are seeing is not all funds came from ARRA. There might be funds at the state level, ARRA funds, and some other funds that are all used to build this one bridge. So how can you slice and dice where the funds came from? Because obviously ARRA is, or the federal government with this ARRA stimulus package, they're interested on how their money was spent. But then overall, looking at this bridge I'm building, I might have funds again from other funds of the state or city, whatever. So how do I slice and dice all that? Then I have to define what's called key performance indicators for schedule, budget, risk, and issues. And what I mean by this is, okay, what are some of the measures do I want the public to see? The public has a minimum set of requirements that they need to see A, B, and C. Okay, and then what about the federal entity? What about the executives in my organization? What about the project managers? So what are these measures that they need to see? So you have to sit down and define that. You have to define governance around using tools like SharePoint, regardless of what platform this is. And when I say governance, we need to define who's going to enter what data, and this is very important. Because, for example, a contractor comes in and puts in, okay, our, we spent this much money, but he or she accidentally hits 2 extra zeros. What's the governance around that? What's the workflow around that? Because the last thing you want is suddenly the project is over budget, right? So how would you monitor and manage all that? And then lastly, what you need to define too is where would this platform be hosted? If you're a large organization working with a lot of different ARRA-funded projects, you might host this platform internally, meaning you have your own big IT team, your SharePoint implementation, and having a solution around ARRA. But what if you're a small entity that you only got a small piece of the fund, but you're still responsible for reporting? Does it make sense to house SharePoint with this ARRA framework internally, or you might go and look for a hosted solution? So these are the things that the recipients need to think about. So what I'm going to show you next is I want to show you a real-world example in a recent project, and I'm still working on it. My organization is working on it. What we did, because of this tight deadline, we needed to pretty much do a couple of things. We needed to create project management templates. And when I say templates, these are defined tasks, and we actually use Microsoft Project for this. You'll see this in a while. But more importantly, once these templates were created, it had to be made available in SharePoint. And in SharePoint, we have a platform that shows a lot of the reporting needs ARRA is looking for. But also, the reason why we did it in Microsoft Project, because this organization has been using Microsoft Project. So they would have a template for building bridges, for fixing sidewalks, for, putting up a stoplight. So they have all these templates available already. So yeah, why reinvent the wheel? So we took this information and have it interact with SharePoint. Once it's in SharePoint, any new bridge that will be built can be defined within SharePoint. Now, in addition to SharePoint, we also use third-party products because of the need of this organization. We use a platform from EPM Live. It works on top of SharePoint. It's essentially an enterprise project management platform. It's a customized solution that's really, really great for ARRA. And we also use web parts from Bamboo Solutions to provide a lot of the charting, the reporting, all that good stuff. So in the end, we took all these best-in-class tools in the short span of time that we have to build this platform. So that's the first thing we did. The second thing we did around the platform is we created publishing pages and content types that have templates that would define and segregate different things. It could be financial reports, block grants, project types, etc. And also we RSS-enabled SharePoint lists, because one of the key requirements from the OMB is the information is rolled up or can be rolled up using RSS, or really simple syndication. So I'll talk more about that briefly. And then another thing we did is we had to develop workflows for publishing data based on the ARRA guidelines. Again, a quick example, if somebody entered in how much they've spent or where they're at in the project, the last thing we want is them putting wrong information. So there's some kind of workflow or approval process before this gets pushed out to the greater public. All right? So let me step you through a couple of screens here. So here's a sample screen as to, this is a prototype that we had as to what the public will see. Again, for those familiar with SharePoint, it looks like any other SharePoint site, but clearly we can rebadge this or rebrand this. But at the public level, what I'm showing here is its minimal set of information, what the law requires that the public should know. So it can be things around performance summary. What are the active, how many late, how many delayed, how many on time, budget reporting, and approval survey. So you see a little chart. Now, this will make much more sense in the next few slides, but what we're seeing here is that it's at the topmost level, if you may, where the information is being gathered from various levels deep. Now this next view is, for example, a portfolio view. Let's say this is from a specific entity or a specific government agency. And what we're looking at here is we have what's called a portfolio of projects that are funded by ARRA. So I can be a director of this organization, or I can be the portfolio or program manager. I can look at all the project that has to do with ARRA. Now, if you look at the middle section where it says project, 59th Street Bridge, Baker Street, New York Street Bridge. So I can drill down, expand, or drill down into further details. But notice that I have checkboxes in green, so that means everything's good. And we've defined what green means, what good means. If it's a schedule, when we started, when we plan to finish, and even shared documents or common documents for the whole portfolio, for the whole organization. Now, if I click on 59th Street Bridge or Baker Street, it will drill down to the project level, and I can see further information. Now, this is another view. It just won't fit on this screen, but we have a separate view for executives, for management. So depending on the group of executives that comes in, again, for a specific project, let's say the Baker Street project, the executive might not care as to all the little details of what the tasks are. They might want to look at the big picture, if the milestone has been met, what the funds look like. In fact, we even threw in this case, this is building a bridge, we threw in a Google Map web part that shows where the location is, and also funding something. This view right here primarily revolves around funding. And then we have funding performance. The next view we see is expanding the funding in more detail. Now, this is another view at the project level. So earlier I showed you the portfolio view where it shows me all the, for example, bridges or constructions that we have. But if I click on a specific project, like here, the Baker Street project, it takes me to a separate or lower level website, if you may, that has all the details about that bridge project or that specific project. So similarly, I can have all the financial information here, what's going on with the project, to a lower level where if I want to go to the task level, I can certainly see this or certainly do this. And notice that for some of you who've used Microsoft Project, this looks very, very similar. What we did is we used EPM Live's tool called Project Publisher, where it allowed me to synchronize Microsoft Project and SharePoint. But once that's done, any individual that's involved in the project, especially if they're involved in specific tasks, they can come in and define where they're at, what the planned start was, what the actual start was, etc., all that good stuff. So I can drill down to this lower level detail. But as you can see, the key is really having a sound process, and second, being able to map and identify all these relationships for the different pieces of information. And that's really the most challenging part. There are tools out there, again, like I said, SharePoint is great because a lot of these reporting capabilities are built in. It's a matter of tying in or making these information interact around different levels. So this is at the lowest level. This is at the task level. So you can see we can put in tasks and all that necessary information. And again, each of these tasks, or in this case, milestones, if you want, can be tied to a specific funding mechanism, be it ARRA or all other types of funding, and we can slice and dice information however we want. So that's just a quick screenshot, a quick glance at the solution we built, and we're actually working with another recipient right now, and they have somewhat of a unique need because the project they're working on has nothing to do with construction, something else. But all in all, though, the key is really to take advantage of a platform like SharePoint is A, you have to understand what are the reporting requirements, and B, you have to understand based on the recipient or the organization you're working with, who are they accountable to? So who's the level up and what information do they need from them? like I said, if you look at the reporting guidelines, RSS is one of the ways to feed information to the higher level. And enabling RSS is built in SharePoint, so it's not a problem. So that's the second critical aspect. And third, you have to be cognizant that this platform should be scalable, meaning if there's existing systems and platform already, can the platform interact with those? But second, these guidelines might change in the future. So is your platform scalable enough to adapt to that change in the guideline? All right. So hopefully that shedded some light around ARRA and how SharePoint can be leveraged. I'd like to take the next 15 minutes or so and spend it for questions and answers. So questions? Any questions?
Hi, Dux. It's Catherine.
Hey, Catherine.
Haven't seen any questions come across yet, but while people think, I just want to say thank you for that great presentation. You covered a lot of ground quickly. So here they come. All the questions.
Very good. All right, great. Luann, we are using PWA. How can we use SharePoint to do the nice reports you have shown us? Very good question. Couple things for those not familiar. PWA stands for Project Web Access. It is a component of Project Server. Now, before I can answer your question, Luann, what version of Project Server or PWA are you using? If you're using 2007, Project Server 2007, it's essentially very good. It's essentially a SharePoint application. So for the charts that you saw, I pretty much use charts from Bamboo Solutions. They have a lot of charts. So let me type it down. You can find some of the nice charts there, or you can go to Dundas. There's a company called Dundas, and just look them up. You find a lot of these nice charts. But you can bring it in as web parts, and PWA will be able to use those and take your information from PWA and generate those charts. Don, what are some of the websites for ARRA? Are you asking about more reference information, more details? One of the key sites I suggest that I found really helpful is Wikipedia. Just do a search on ARRA. They do a good job in explaining it concisely. Now, if you want to see the 40-page document on ARRA itself, just go to the whitehouse.gov, or recovery.gov. You should find the full documentation on ARRA and all the reporting requirements. Catherine, great question. What does SharePoint cost? Very good. SharePoint actually, what I've shown you is use the base SharePoint platform. What's out there is the base platform called Windows SharePoint Services. I'll just put the acronym here, version 3. And WSS version 3 is actually part of Windows Server. In short, it's free. So Windows SharePoint Services, it's free. It's part of Windows Server. Now, if you already have what's called MOSS, Microsoft Office SharePoint Server, it could certainly do the same thing. But MOSS is a kind of sort of add-on to WSS. It has a lot of extra good stuff, but that's not free. There's different pricing for it depending on your organization and licensing. The demo I showed you, I just used WSS. Let me type that down. Plus EPM Live's solution, plus some Bamboo Solution web parts. And with those, how much did it cost? WSS, again, it's part of Windows Server license, so we didn't pay for anything. EPM Live, depending on, again, the level of reporting you need to do, EPM Live provides a lot of the nice roll-ups and reporting mechanisms. Not to say that you have to have that. You can build those in WSS, but it might take time. So in the interest of time, we took this EPM Live application that has a lot of the reporting roll-ups built in. And again, depending on your organization, the pricing varies. Just go to their website. And Bamboo Solutions have these web parts. Again, the pricing varies depending on the web parts, but the charting web parts are a couple $100s. Okay, very good. Are web accessibility requirements in effect for ARRA reporting? Catherine, are you talking about 508 compliance? Is that what you're asking about? If you're asking for 508 compliance, I would say yes, but I haven't really looked at this. but since if the reporting is around, or it will be displayed around federal government websites, I would suspect that, yeah, it should be 508 compliant, which is part of the American Disabilities Act. In essence, has to be web accessibility. And the beauty with SharePoint is, I don't know if a lot of folks know this, SharePoint comes with a mobile access feature where pretty much it's a stripped-down version of the site. It's text only. So if you look at that piece, yes, it's 508 compliant. You don't have to do anything extra. Good. Other questions? Is the website you're building available online? I'm sorry, Don, I missed that. Not quite yet. Once it goes live, there are a couple pieces we're working on with this government entities, but what will be online is the public view. A lot of the other pieces that I showed you, things like putting in tasks, having roll-up of all the projects, that will not be available in the public view. It's more for the recipient's view where, again, let's think about bridge building, where contractors can log into special website, they put in what they've done, the government entity looks at it, okay, here are all the 10 bridges. That piece is not available to the public. Catherine, so how do small orgs afford a report via WSS? Very good question. So small organizations that A, don't have the budget, and B, don't have the infrastructure to this, that's why some of the options you might want to consider are hosted solutions, and which essentially means you don't even have to have WSS. More and more, it's not being introduced yet. I believe Microsoft is coming up with a solution as well. In the next few weeks or months, you'll start seeing hosted solutions for ARRA. Trevor, what do you think of PWA? I think Project Web Access, Project Server is a great platform. The reason why I'm talking about SharePoint right now is for this organization I work with, Project Server does not fit. And the reason why I say it doesn't fit, and I'm sure a lot of you would agree with me, Project Server is great as long as you have defined processes for project management, very defined processes. Because without that, Project Server will be a burden to your organization. Project Server is a large platform, and unless you have a sound process in place on how you manage projects, how you plan, how you track, if you don't have all those, if you're coming from a paper and pen organization or an Excel spreadsheet organization of project management and then jumping to Project Server right away, that's kind of like a big leap. And I see SharePoint is like the middle ground for this. Now, if you do have Project Server, absolutely, you can do all these things I've shown you with Project Server and PW. How long does it take to build an application similar to the ARRA site? For this, what I've shown you earlier, we had a 4-week timeline to build all that. And we were able to do it. The only challenge was there are certain pieces as we were building this, certain processes didn't exist. So for example, again, when we define what's late, what's on time, the organization we're working with, they had to come into some a shared understanding, as I was defining it, some convergent idea of what you mean by that. So those are the things that takes the most out of time, but building the platform itself, since SharePoint is already there, it's just a matter of tweaking and hooking it up to different reporting roll-ups. You know, that whole thing, actually it's less than 4 weeks. Why SharePoint over Drupal and do they interface? Very good question. Like I said, there's a lot of platform out there. The reason for SharePoint, Catherine, if you get the chance to go and review my first webcast, SharePoint, the beauty with SharePoint, yeah, it's a web-based technology. Drupal is a great technology also, don't get me wrong. But since a lot of organizations today are Microsoft-based organizations, SharePoint interacts nicely with existing Microsoft-based tools. Let me give you a quick example. If you're using a non-Microsoft tool, let's say Drupal or Google Apps or other products, you end up doing, you might take information, put it in Excel, a simple example, and have that same bit of information, put it in Drupal or other platform as well, or Alfresco, whatever. But the beauty with SharePoint is, apart from the web capability, it interacts with almost all of the Microsoft Office-based products. As an example, in theory, I can put in information in Excel and don't have to do anything else. It'll show up in SharePoint. I can put information in SharePoint, just one place. It will show up in my local copy of Excel. So things like that do not exist in other technologies. Now, if you're telling me, well, Dux, we're not a Microsoft shop, we're using open source, we're using Mac, no Microsoft stuff at all, then yeah, then this might not be the platform for you. So it's not even why one's better over the other. I firmly believe a lot of these technologies can pretty much do the same thing. But what I'm seeing, based on my experience, government entities, large organizations, almost all of them are Microsoft-based shops. And SharePoint is the tie that binds a lot of pieces together. And you talk about efficiency, yeah. I mean, how great would it be if you don't have to enter the same bit of information in 10 different places? So, Catherine, if you get the chance, go ahead and look at the webcast archive. Look at my very first webcast, seven ways you can leverage SharePoint for project management. I explain why SharePoint over other platforms. Good. Let's see. Any other questions? So great. So hopefully this session is insightful and helpful for everybody. Just understanding big picture of what ARRA is. Certainly there's more details to it. Again, it's like 400-something pages if you look at the full law. But where I'm coming from is this reporting requirement is critical. And in short, it doesn't mean, as the American public, it brings some kind of, I guess, assurance to me that these projects that are funded by ARRA will not just be spent without me knowing how it was spent or not spent. So part of the requirement to spend these, again, these funds is to have this transparency platform in place. If you have any other questions, certainly this webcast is archived. Feel free to share it with your colleagues or people you know that might benefit from it. But my contact information is up on the screen. Don't be a stranger. Come connect with me. Again, Twitter, blog, email. But other than that, thank you for this opportunity, O'Reilly, and thank you everybody for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you, Dux, and thank you everyone else for joining us. As I said, I'll send an email as soon as the recording is available and tell you how to view it. And if you want to copy the chat, a lot of people do at the end of this, the best way to do it is just click in the chat window, do select all, and copy and paste it in another a text file or something like that. And I'm doing that right now, so I have a copy of it. And I think that's about it. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Dux. Looking forward to the next one.
That's right. So everybody join me next month. We'll have another fun webcast about SharePoint. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.